Hey, Pro-Life Gen, it's Kristan Hawkins. Welcome to the Kristan Hawkins Show. Today, we're going to be talking about the stupid and horrific decision the FDA just made in approving a new company to sell more chemical abortion pills, but cheaper. We're also going to talk about the second disappointing decision that the Trump administration has just made on IVF and what it means for the pro-life movement. I'm going to dig into that because I know there's a lot of questions. I also want to talk about a sobering statistic that just came out showing that mothers who aborted their children who were diagnosed with a severe abnormality in the womb do not benefit physically or psychologically from that decision. It is time to call out those who are profiting off of this despair. And finally, I'm going to end on some good news talking about Planned Parenthood facilities that are closing down by the dozens this year. And I have an upgraded list for you. It's time to say sayonara to Planned Parenthood. Hey, Pro-Life Gen, are you ready to boldly stand for life in 2026? It's all on the line, and now courage is needed more than ever before. I want to see you at the 2026 National Pro-Life Summit on Saturday, January 24th at the Grand Hyatt in Washington, D.C. That's just the day after the National Pro-Life March. Right now, you can lock in an early bird discount, $20 off a ticket when you use the code EB20 at checkout. But don't wait because the special is going to end on Halloween. So it's EB20 at checkout. You'll save $20 off your student ticket to the 2026 National Pro-Life Summit. We're going to be announcing more speakers in the coming months, but we're already thrilled to say that Brett Cooper of The Brett Cooper Show, Nick Freitas, Shane Winnings will be joining us amongst other leaders. This is the top pro-life training event of the year in the entire world. So make sure you reserve your spot at prolifesummit.com. Be a part of the pro-life generation in 2026 and join us for what will be a sold-out 2026 National Pro-Life Summit. I'm going to start today talking about the deep state over at the Trump Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and what they just did that we really didn't see coming in the pro-life movement. So there's been a lot of talk, and we've signed on to letters encouraging the FDA to reevaluate their 2000 approval of mifepristone, the first drug in the chemical abortion protocol, RU486. There was just recently 51 senators sending a letter encouraged by the pro-life movement. Students for Life has filed numerous citizen petitions. We've been introducing legislation, both federally and at state levels, all attacking chemical abortion, which is the leading cause of abortion in our country, the leading cause of infant death in our country. So while we're doing all of this, in their infinite wisdom over at the FDA, I would call it the deep state, pro-abortion deep state at the FDA, because let's be real, the deep state has not been eliminated from the FDA. They approved a new drug company to start selling mifepristone, a generic mifepristone. And they're saying it's because they're required to approve generic drugs that are identical to name brand drugs. But it's bogus because, first of all, they actually have already been delaying this for a while, even during the Biden administration. So they didn't have to do anything they didn't want to do. But now we have another mifepristone on the market that kills babies, but just cheaper. But before I go into even more about, as you know, this should just be called the Chemical Abortion Show at this point, because I'm always talking about chemical abortions and how deadly they are. I want to talk about the new company that was approved to sell this generic mifepristone in the United States. The company is called Evita. Now, if you paid attention to the abortion industry over the years, you will notice that they choose names that are significant and I think pretty telling. For instance, there's a chain of abortion businesses in Oregon called the Lilith Clinic. Lilith is the name of the female demon associated with danger to infants and pregnant women. There is also an abortion fund in Texas called the Lilith Fund. I think there was also a Lilith Fair back in the 90s where all the female pop artists would all sing and talk about their love for abortion. Creepy? Yeah. Telling? Yeah. Well, this new company, who is approved to sell mifepristone, a drug that's going to kill more babies in America, has an interesting name, Evita. The name is from the name Eva, which comes from the Hebrew meaning life or living one. It's literally the name of Eve in the Bible. Eve is supposed to be the mother of all the living. Unfortunately, we know how Eve's story ends in Genesis. It doesn't end in life, but in death for her and all of her descendants because of her sin and painful childbirth. Thank you very much. So this company that was just approved to sell abortion drugs to facilitate moms directly killing their own babies is named after a mother who brought death to all humanity, as told in Genesis. I would venture to guess this was not a coincidence. The battle is real, and we need to take this seriously. Speaking of taking things seriously, this is not something that seems to be happening within the Trump administration when it comes to the pro-life movement. It's a very bad look and a very bad sign when the abortion industry is scoring wins under the most pro-life Republican we've had in decades. In the wake of this news, Students for Life pushed forward our fight to continue to see mifepristone ultimately removed from the market entirely. First, we're refiling three of our 5 past citizen petitions that have been sent to the FDA. Citizen petitions are a legal document. It's not just like you sign a petition and no one reads it. It's a legal document that actually tells the FDA what you want them to do. And then they actually are legally required to respond to the petition within 150 to 180 days. And the petitions we're resubmitting to them about this now generic Evita mifepristone cover 3 main things. First, the environmental risk and REMS reform. Our first citizen petition that we've just sent to the FDA calls for the FDA to reevaluate the REMS, the risk evaluation mitigation strategies for mifepristone. If prescribers give women, mothers, mifepristone, they should be legally required to give her medical waste bags and catch kits as well. Because as morbid as it is, the reality is that mifepristone produces a dead human body. If mifepristone does its job, that's what it does. And without a catch kit, that poor child's body, the placenta, all of the pregnancy tissue, the pregnancy blood that's been laced with dangerous abortion chemicals, mainly anti-progesterone blockers that are in mifepristone and only found in one drug, mifepristone, will be expelled into the toilet and they enter a public water system. And if you've paid attention to any of my past podcasts about this, these 3 anti-progesterone metabolites do not go inactive after they pass through the woman's body or the dead child. They remain active when they go to our water supply, and we have proven are actually present in tap drinking water, even after going through the wastewater treatment plant. In fact, this argument is so dangerous to the abortion industry. The New York Times just released a big article about what Students for Life has been saying for the past 5 years, that chemical abortion pills are polluting our drinking water. And you know you're doing something right when the New York Times writes an article about your whole plan, because they're warning the abortion industry. We have the goods and the receipts, right? The other citizen petition that we're resubmitting to the FDA on this Evita mifepristone is one addressing the very clear violation of the Endangered Species Act. Because we know mifepristone's in the water, we're saying at least you have to revoke approval for mifepristone, the brand name and the generic name, until the FDA legally conducts its legally required consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service. Because when they approved chemical abortion mifepristone in 2000, they were supposed to check the box on the application that mifepristone would not violate the Endangered Species Act and harm any of the endangered species, and they literally didn't. And we know it's in our drinking water. The third citizen petition addresses the Clean Water Act and compliance. We say the FDA must halt mifepristone distribution until it can demonstrate compliance with state water quality standards under the Clean Water Act. The FDA has clearly failed to determine whether the proliferation of chemical abortion pills for the past 25 years in our nation violates the clean water standards, which risks permanent contamination of U.S. waters. The bottom line from all of our citizen petitions is that mifepristone should not be on the market today. This is a drug that first and foremost kills human children. That alone means it shouldn't be on the market. It also poses grave risks to mothers, and ones that we know they've been lying about, because the EEPC data that came out in May of over 860,000 insurance records tells us mifepristone is 22 times more dangerous for mothers to take than the FDA even told us in 2000 when they originally approved mifepristone. And the third reason we shouldn't have mifepristone in the market is now there's a risk to the general population. And the FDA, in their woke pro-abortion deep state mode, doesn't really care that we are all now drinking anti-progesterone metabolites in our drinking water. And this is reckless. This betrays public trust. This is something that every American, even if they're pro-choice and don't care about these innocent, defenseless babies in the womb, should care, because everybody needs progesterone. Men need it for brain development. Women need it to get pregnant and stay pregnant. This is a hard issue. This is something we've been working on for years in Students for Life and the pro-life generation. And it's going to be harder now while the President Trump and his administration continue to allow the pro-abortion deep state to operate within the FDA. We've submitted letters to Congress alongside of 40 other pro-life organizations just recently, demanding that the EPA, this was actually, I think, quoted in the New York Times article last week, because of our latest letter that we wrote and having all of the pro-life groups sign on to was sent to the EPA, not to the FDA, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, demanding that they conduct regular and comprehensive environmental testing of forever chemicals, PFAs, i.e. chemical abortion pills. And apparently, according to the New York Times last week, they're taking our requests seriously. So there's a lot more to do. You're going to be hearing a lot more from me on Instagram and X about this developing situation. I would encourage you to go to thisischemicalabortion.com, track the issue there with us, and get involved, please. Unfortunately, chemical abortion was not the only piece of bad news for moms and babies out of the Trump administration in recent days, or since the last time I did this podcast with you, okay? Just this week, this Wednesday, President Trump announced efforts at the White House to expand IVF throughout the United States. This is not good for anyone. In fact, I'm quite PO'd because we've been working with White House staff for a number of months, knowing this was a campaign promise, knowing this was something that was important to President Trump, to relay all of our issues in the pro-life movement. And then even President Trump was asked yesterday about this, and pro-lifers who disagree with IVF, and he acted like he didn't know that pro-lifers disagree with IVF. So either he truly doesn't know, which could be the case. He's kind of busy, like ending wars. But then that means his staff isn't doing their job in telling him the truth, because we've been very clear in the pro-life movement. IVF is not pro-life. Now, I know a lot of people get very confused on this point. So I'm going to break some of the reasons why IVF is not pro-life down for you. And I hope and pray you can hear these reasons, because I know this is a hard conversation to have. And I'm not saying this to attack anyone or anyone who has been conceived in IVF. Every child who's been conceived in IVF is just as special, just as precious, has just as much dignity as you and I. But the fact is that person's siblings who were either frozen in a lab, who will most likely never be born, or who were discarded in the lab because their genetics weren't good enough, their lives also mattered. And this is why we have to speak out against IVF in the pro-life movement. IVF is deadly to children. Actually, it kills more children. If you look at the numbers of discarded humans in embryonic form that are created and discarded, thrown away, or destroyed in IVF clinics, or donated to research and then destroyed, just on the number scale, IVF kills more humans every year in our nation than abortion. What do I mean about frozen? Because some people say, well, if the baby's frozen, the baby's not dead. That is true. However, when you look at the studies that are out there, somewhere between, and there's conflicting studies, so I'm going to give you a range, somewhere between 80 to 90%, so almost all, of humans in embryonic form who are frozen because of the IVF process will never be born. Meaning, when they try to thaw those children, they will die, or when they're implanted, they die. They're not going to be born. Not a high success rate. We literally have millions of humans who are frozen on ice who will never be born. And before you say, but Kristan, why, if I'm pro-life, if I do IVF, I won't make a bunch of humans. I'll just make one or two. You can try that. It's extremely expensive if you do that. And the IVF clinic is going to do everything possible not to get you to do that, because so many of these humans do not implant, or something is wrong genetically with those humans. So that's why they make so many humans. In fact, the part of the announcement yesterday that Trump made wasn't, it was like an announcement for a discounted drug. These drugs are the ones that help you produce and release more eggs. So when you go through IVF, because it's super expensive, it allows you to create more humans. That was the discount on the drug prices, because the announcement yesterday wasn't, IVF is now government funded. That was going to be. There was talk about making it mandated that every employer who provided insurance would have to pay for it. The pro-life win that came out of yesterday was that they are encouraging employers to cover IVF, and they're going to try to reduce costs of IVF by giving these discounted, favored nation status to these drug companies to get the drugs used in IVF to be cheaper. So the win was it wasn't a mandate, which is what it was going to be. It's just a recommendation, but it's still bad. But okay, so I've already gone through. IVF is terrible for humans, children, because it kills them. It's also really bad for humans because it commodifies them. I think we need to talk about that. I know people get really upset because they're like, I was infertile. I wanted to have a baby and I desperately be a good mother. The pro-life movement does not want people to suffer, or families who want to have babies not to have babies. That's not why we're saying this. We're saying this is why IVF isn't pro-life, because it kills humans. It commodifies humans. It turns having a child into this ultimate blessing and privilege into a right. When people believe having a children is their right, it allows for terrible, awful things to happen, because nothing can stop you from achieving your right to having children. But this is a reality. No one has the right to have a child. You don't have that right. You can't obtain that right. You can't be like, I have a right to have a child. I'm infertile, or my children are older and I want a baby at home. I have a right to have children. I'm going to go to the grocery store and abduct a child from the grocery store. And I'm going to steal a child from another family because I have a right to have a child. No, you can't do that. Or you can't go, I have a right to have a child, therefore I'm going to go to the border and offer one of the human traffickers that used to come through the border under Joe Biden, not under President Trump. Thank you, President Trump, for that. I'm going to offer a human trafficker $5,000 to go get me a child from a poor family in Mexico that I can buy. We would all say, no, we're sorry you can't have children. We sympathize with your pain, but you don't have a right to go buy a kid or steal a kid. No, you can't achieve that right at any cost. This is why when people say, like, I have a right to have an abortion, or I have a right to have as much sex as I want. Well, then you have abortion. Because if you have a right to have as much sex as you want, by all means, you can't let anything get in the way, even if being pregnant or, being postpartum, can't let that get in your way. The other reason IVF, this is all the reasons. You can't commodify children. That's always wrong. What we've seen, and there was a story this summer about a gay couple who created a child, paid for a child to be created, must have paid to rent a mother's womb, probably a poor mother's womb in surrogacy, which has its whole other list of issues of renting other women's bodies. And then they posted some story on social media about their kid. And then when people started researching the couple, the one dude is like a known child sex predator. Now, if they had gone through an adoption agency, that probably would have been flagged that, like, hey, one of these guys is a known child sex predator. But because they had money and they paid to have a baby created in a lab, and they paid a woman to rent her womb to gestate that baby, there was nothing. There was no oversight. I still don't know what happened. People were calling for the Department of Children and Families in Pennsylvania to step in. Still don't know. I mean, we can also talk about, the commodification of her body as a surrogate. There's been numerous stories out there. I think most recent one was one in California where a gay couple paid a woman to be a surrogate. The woman gets cancer. She says she's going to withhold treatment until the baby's born, wants to birth the baby a little earlier so she can start cancer treatment and save her life. The child will be premature, but the doctor said the child will be fine, might have some learning disabilities or something, some of the risks that come with premature birth. And the gay men didn't want to do that. The gay men told her to abort the baby, their baby, that they had bought and paid for. She said she didn't want to do that she would adopt the baby herself. And they said no. And the court ordered her to abort their baby. So much for my body, my choice. So, okay. IVF kills more humans than abortion. IVF commodifies human children, turning them from a right and a blessing, turning from a privilege and a blessing to a right. It commodifies women's bodies. It's also really bad for women. Think about just the stats. The average age of a woman having IVF is 36. Why is that? Because people, especially in Gen Z and Gen Y, are waiting and are saying they want to wait later and later to get married. Well, that's not a really good idea. A lot of parents and the feminist movement, the left, has been telling people, just wait till you have enough money to have kids and get married and have kids. Well, guess what? You're never going to have enough money. That's why the Charlie Kirk tweet of have more kids than you can afford went so viral, because people are like, what? You can't say that. That's irresponsible. Yes, have more kids than you can afford, by the way. So what's happening is people are waiting till later to get married. They're following the feminist dream of conquering their career and getting to where they want in the career ladder before they think about having kids. They've been using contraceptives, which are really bad for their bodies, for 2 decades at that point. Then when they go off the birth control pill after being on the birth control pill since they were 16, can't get pregnant. So guess what? Big Pharma gets to win again and gets to make more money off of her, because now she's been paying for contraceptive for 2 decades. Now she's going to pay them again for more drugs for IVF. So the average age is 36 for a woman who tries to undergo IVF. At that age, she has a 32% chance of having a live birth after 1 cycle of IVF, a 44% chance after 2 cycles of IVF, and 50% chance after 3 cycles. This means after 3 cycles, which could take months and years and be about $90,000 or more, she has a 50-50 chance of ever holding a baby in her arms. At that point, after 3 cycles, at least more than 20 of her kids on average would have been lost in the process, either by intentionally discarding the human and embryonic form in the selection process, like kids like my kids, Gunnar and Gracie, of CF. Oh, they're automatically discarded because that can be diagnosed in a petri dish. Or they won't survive the thaw after being frozen, or they won't survive just the transfer to her womb, and that will be miscarried after being implanted in the womb. Or they could be intentionally aborted because they implant more embryos, human embryos, than she wants in live birth. So sometimes they can implant 4 or 5 humans in embryonic form into the womb. And then if a miracle happens and she actually starts to gestate all 4 or 5 of those children, they'll recommend a selective abortion to, reduce the multiples in the womb. Take the, quadruplets down to twins or something like that. Yeah, that's the reality. And IVF, by the way, this whole time she started going through this process doesn't actually make her doesn't cure her from infertility, because it doesn't treat the underlying condition that's been preventing her from conceiving naturally. Even though women often have a very, very treatable condition that simply never has gotten diagnosed because doctors push them onto contraception when they're having heavy and painful periods when they're 16, and then into IVF clinics when she can't just get pregnant, conceive, and gestate children and wash their hands of the problem. From an administration and pro-life legislators, if they understood this issue better, they would know we want actions to get to the bottom of the infertility crisis in the country. This is what no one talked about. So yesterday at the press, yesterday, it was Wednesday. Sorry, I don't know what day it is. I'm recording this on Thursday in case you couldn't figure that out. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the HHS secretary, said, we have a problem in our country. We're below replacement rate. Replacement rate is 2.1 live births for every woman. Yeah, I know. COVID killed our fertility rate in the country. It's down to 1.6. If you get down to like 1.1, 1.2, you can never get back. This is a major problem. So their solution is be pro-life, make more babies. Cool, awesome. But you know what they didn't talk about yesterday is why are all these people going to big pharma, paying big pharma for these very expensive IVF, medicines, then going to an IVF clinic because we have a crisis of infertility in our country, which this is what blows my mind about what's going on because we're all about MAHA, making America healthy again. IVF is not MAHA. IVF doesn't treat any root cause. We're talking about we're wondering, does Tylenol consumption during gestation and pregnancy cause autism? We want to, ask hard questions that might be controversial, like what are the foods we're putting in our bodies and how is that leading to our cancer rates? RFK has wanted to ask hard questions that are a little controversial at times to get to the root cause of disease and illness in our country. But when it comes to infertility, all they say is, here, let's cut a deal with a pharma company. Sorry, I'm going to tone it down. But it really pisses me off because once again, women are getting the short end of this entire stick. We were told for decades as women, there's something wrong with us, that we can gestate and get pregnant, that we're not like the normative male body. And in order to succeed in the workplace, we got to put all of these artificial male hormones into our body that tricks our body every single month into thinking we're pregnant, which is really bad for our bodies. Don't ask any questions, you stupid women. Just keep consuming these pills and you can climb the corporate career ladder. It'll be better for your employers because they're not going to pay a bunch of maternity leaves and have to deal with babies in the workforce. It'll be better for the economy. There'll be less mouths to feed, less poor babies, right? These are all arguments we've heard. No one asks any questions about, I don't know, like what does putting artificial hormones do to our brain? Oh, it changes our sex drive. It changes our taste in food and music. Oh, it's okay. Women will be fine. Can you imagine if they would have done that to men? Do you think that would have been okay? No. So for decades, we were told to do this to suppress a natural good function of our body to continue civilization. And now, instead of the Trump administration addressing the infertility crisis, which is leading back to the contraception use, by the way, we're just going to mask it again and cut a deal with Big Pharma for cheaper IVF drugs and to give them more money and to give the IVF industry and practitioners more money. This is the opposite of MAHA. Infertility needs to be studied seriously in our country. Government money needs to go and be invested into finding answers and solutions. Because maybe the anti-progesterone metabolites we're drinking in our water from chemical abortion pills are harming our fertility. Maybe that might have something to do with our problems. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe let's study it. Facilitating more IVF, it will create more humans. It's not going to cure infertility. It's not going to diagnose and treat underlying causes that real families struggle with. It's just going to make a whole industry and a bunch of big pharma companies more money. That's all it's going to do. The other reason I would say, let me sum it up here. IVF kills babies, more babies than abortion. IVF commodifies children, and I'm giving you some very real cases on that. Commodifies women, talked about surrogates. IVF is not curative. It doesn't solve infertility. The other thing is IVF is destructive towards families. It creates and facilitates unnatural and sometimes abusive scenarios where humans are being created for buyers. One example I'll give you is not accusing Paris Hilton of being a bad mother to her two born children, but I will tell you, she gave a very public interview. She must have had an abortion that was traumatic for her at some point in her young age. So she didn't want to go through childbirth. So she wanted to create humans with her husband in a lab, she's rich, hire poor women's wombs for surrogacy. And she joked at one point in an interview, I think it was with People magazine, that she had 20 kids on ice, 20 boys, because she didn't want any boys. What kind of family structure is that? That you get to choose if you want a boy or girl? Like what? Because what would happen if there was a whoopsies in the IVF clinic and you accidentally implanted a male embryo, human embryonic form into a surrogate's body? You're going to kill that baby too because you don't like it. You don't like the sex. Boys are too rough. They're too dirty. Whatever your view of boys are. It just creates abusive scenarios for families. I already talked about the same-sex couple in Pennsylvania who the one guy was a child sex abuser. There's like literally, this is a wild, wild west situation because once again, just like with abortion, no one wants to have hard conversations, especially pansy lawmakers. So here's a scenario that's completely legal. You could be a child sex abuser, a molester, be a pedophile, which the lady running for governor, who's the leading candidate in the California gubernatorial race, said that pedophilia shouldn't be frowned upon and it's just a sexual identity. But anyway, pedophilia, she can be a pedophile. If you had enough money, you could buy an embryo. You could buy an egg from a mother. You could use your sperm, or you might buy sperm from somebody else. So buy a bought egg, bought sperm, pay an IVF clinic to mix the egg and sperm up to create humans in the embryonic form, pay a surrogate to then gestate your selected humans. Maybe you only want a boy, so only implant boys into the surrogate, birth that baby, take that baby home from the hospital, and start abusing that child. There is nothing stopping that from happening. I actually hate to even say this because if somebody was watching it, it would give them an idea. Like, this is messed up. There's now thruples, like 3 people, who are trying to use genetic material from all 3 parents to create human beings. And pretty soon you will have human beings being gestated who have 3 genetic parents. Yeah, like nothing can go wrong with that. More babies is a good thing. We love babies. We need babies. Unfortunately, IVF does not produce a net positive amount of babies because many, many more babies will be killed in the process. We have an actual fertility crisis in our country that no one actually in modern medicine isn't treating or even addressing. And the series of events that we're seeing in the federal government from the Trump administration, once again, is a perfect example of misguided compassion. One of the most disturbing parts in the story is that a lot of these IVF efforts are actually being spearheaded by pro-life champion legislators who can, have always said that they're pro-life, who have the perfect pro-life rating on our scorecards against abortion. Senator Katie Britt of Alabama, Senator Ted Cruz. I think this suggests a profound lack of education on many of these legislators' parts and even the Trump administration. This is a huge problem that people don't understand. This, even people who are like following me on Instagram are like, what are you talking about? I've always been pro-life. Of course IVF is pro-life. Benny Johnson posted a video of President Trump making this announcement at the White House on IVF. It's like most pro-life president ever. No. And until our churches, especially our Protestant evangelical churches, start talking about this, we're going to continue to have this problem. We have to educate our neighbors and our friends and those who follow us on social media about this. Because I guarantee you, if you asked like 9 out of 10 pro-life Americans or Christian Americans how they felt about IVF is a good thing, I bet you they would say yes. And this total narrative ignores the fact that IVF kills more children in elective abortion every year. It kills more children than elective abortion. It gives IVF doctors an excuse not to diagnose and treat the underlying causes of women's infertility. And I would say it puts the nuclear family in jeopardy. We desperately need those who claim to be Christian and pro-life to know what IVF really is, how it destroys children's lives, how it violates their dignity, as well as the dignity of their parents and families. So do your part. Educate your church to have, and encourage them to host a bioethics series or discussion about this. Talk about infertility with your friends. This should not be a taboo topic. Talk on social media to your friends and families about there are more ethical, affordable alternatives to couples facing infertility. I'm going to give you some of those right now. First one, NAPRO technology, NAPRO technology. Creighton model, fertility care system, Billings ovulation model, the Marquette method, FEMM. If you know somebody who's struggling with infertility and is desperate to get pregnant, send them to the St. Paul the Six Institute in Omaha. Here's their website, stpaulvi.com. They will see anyone. You do not have to be a Christian, but they are a holistic medical center who will treat your underlying causes of infertility. I know many, many babies who've been conceived and born because their parents, as Protestants, they don't have to be Catholic, went to Omaha and actually had infertility addressed. You can also go to factsaboutfertility.org and you can learn about the Billings and Marquette fertility care, Creighton models, and you can find practitioners and mentors in your communities to help you. The reality is the alternatives, the ethical, cost-effective, because this is like super cheap, options aren't being considered because of one thing. There's no economic incentive. So one of the books I have behind my desk is called How Change Happens. And I talk about sometimes it's about how social movements win and what you need to do. Like the first is you have to have the largest grassroots army. That's what we do at Students for Life, right? That's why we build the talent pipeline. Every winning social movement has the largest grassroots army. That's what I get up in the morning obsessed to do. But one of the things in this book, How Change Happens, Leslie Crutchfield's the author. If you want to read it, get on Amazon. I think you have to get used. It's not in print anymore. But one of the principles about winning social movements is that they can make markets work for them. And I think that's one of the challenges we have when it comes to NAPRO technology and all these other, we call them restorative reproductive medicine models, RRM models, is because they're cheap, they're holistic. And there's not a big industry who's pushing them. So like one of the case studies that Crutchfield uses in our books is the anti-smoking movement, about how when Nicorette came out, the gum that was supposed to help you stop your nicotine addiction and help you, not crave the cigarette. Then you had whole companies who were making money off of selling Nicorette to cigarette smokers that were then doing advertising for you, telling people to get off smoking cigarettes and buy their gum instead. We don't have that in the pro-life movement. That's one of my biggest frustrations is the St. Paul Six Institute's one center. Facts About Fertility is a free website. A lot of the petitioners of Creighton and Billings and all of the models, they do it for free or very low cost to couples to help them learn about their bodies. And we actually need the market forces to come to work because then the market will start doing our job for us. So just a little plug if any of you are looking for entrepreneurial ideas out there. All right, next thing we're going to talk about, and I'm going to go quick, is prenatal diagnosis. You need to be educated on this. There's a lot of things that can go wrong when you're pregnant. And that's why you have that 20-week ultrasound screening, and there's blood tests, and there's poor prenatal diagnoses that women are often, mothers are often given. Now, by the way, we know that about 80% of prenatal diagnosis can often be wrong. But the 100% prescription all the time with most OBGYNs is abortion, even if they're wrong. And I've talked for years about all the horror stories of adverse prenatal diagnoses that were wrong, right? But what you need to know is that when there's a serious situation, anencephaly, for example, when a child's brain is not developing in the womb and the child may only have hours or minutes after being born, it's always told to mom, have an abortion. That's the most compassionate option. Your child won't suffer. You won't suffer. You can always try again and have a normal, healthy baby. That's, and the view is that the child's life isn't worth living and that you're going to go through pain to give birth to a child who's just going to die anyway. So it's better if you just abort the child because then you won't see it. That's really, I'm brass taxing it for you, right? But here's the deal. That doesn't take away her pain. And a new study that's come out has actually proven that having an abortion after the adverse prenatal diagnosis does not help mom physically or psychologically. A peer-reviewed study from 2015 I just stumbled upon from the journal Prenatal Diagnosis. It's called Pregnancy Continuation, Organizational Religious Activity Followed Prenatal Diagnosis of a Lethal Field Defect are Associated with Improved Psychological Outcome. It's the longest title ever. Essentially, researchers set out to figure out the psychological impact that abortion had on parents who had been diagnosed with a child with having adverse prenatal diagnosis, meaning a life-threatening diagnosis, versus those who continued the pregnancy after this diagnosis. It was an anencephaly diagnosis.
There was a huge part of me that wanted to go to term to hold my daughter. I mean, that's what I wanted. I wanted to see what she looked like, and I wanted to hold her. But my husband and I, after talking a lot about it, he and I didn't want to see our daughter suffer. We were told that she could be born not alive. She could be born alive and live for a minute, 2 minutes, an hour. But there was it was 100% fatal. She wasn't going to survive this.
What they found is that, here, I'll read it to you. Women who terminated reported significantly more despair, avoidance, and depression than women who continued the pregnancy. They also found that, quote, organizational religious activity was associated with reduction in grief. And they concluded, quote, there appears to be a psychological benefit to women to continue the pregnancy following a lethal fetal diagnosis. We often hear stories, sob stories that put online of women who've been whose children have been diagnosed with a lethal, fatal disease in the womb, and it's like, oh, I'm so glad I had this abortion. I'm being a loving mom by killing the baby and by having the abortion. But I don't think we're ever being told, and women certainly aren't being told they're not being told the truth. The reason why the OBGYN wants you to just have an abortion is something because they are afraid of you suing them. There's something called wrongful birth lawsuits out there, and people have won. Actually, there was a New York Times writer a couple of years ago who sued her doctor because her son was born with CF, the same disease my children have, cystic fibrosis. And she had birthed Dudley, and the prenatal test was wrong. Duh, New York Times is even proven. Apparently, she doesn't read her newspaper. Dudley was born with CF, so she sued and won because the doctor didn't tell her he had CF. Doctors would rather not have to worry about complicated birth or a mother saying it's a wrongful birth because I didn't want this baby who's sick. So they'd rather just tell her, go over there, wash my hands of it, get it taken care of, have an abortion. Even it's a late-term abortion. Usually a lot of these abortions are late-term. Have a late-term abortion and try again for a healthy baby later and come back and see me. That's what they want. Women are in tragic, horrific circumstances, and they're being lied to, and it's being weaponized against them. They're not protecting their health or their psychological well-being by prescribing abortion. It's actually tragic what these women are doing. Not only are they killing children, but they're making a decision that they're being told is a selfless decision. Having abortion is a selfless decision for you and for your baby. No, at the end of the day, your baby is still going to die. Whether your baby dies by him or herself in the womb, or the baby dies surrounded by your loved ones and in your loving arms. If you've received an adverse prenatal diagnosis, you're confident that it's actually correct, your baby is still going to pass. The question is, how is it going to happen? Are you going to pay someone to kill your child, or are you going to love your child till their very last breath? Now, choosing life might feel harder at the time because you're going to feel the baby kicking in your womb. You're going to see your baby's precious face. But I can guarantee you, and this research proves, that is a better psychological outcome for you. And there's actually help. You're not like on your own. There's something called prenatal hospice. It exists. It's real. Katie Yoder recently wrote in one Sunday Visitor about my friend, former abortionist and now pro-life OBGYN, Dr. John Brashowski, and other physicians across the country that banded together to create perinatal hospice, PERINATAL, if you want to go to Google it. Perinatal hospice, quote, offers specialized medical, spiritual, emotional support for families that receive a prenatal diagnosis indicating their baby may die soon, before or soon after birth. There are a lot of perinatal hospice and palliative care options out there for mother and child. This can look different depending on the situation. It can look like delivery spaces that accommodate extended families to be present to meet the baby as soon as the baby's born, having a photography session right there at birth to ensure memories are captured. It can include having something called cuddle cot, which will slow the natural changes that happen to the baby's body after he or she passes away, giving the family more time to say goodbye to their child. There's all of these things that can help provide closure, to give families the opportunity to say goodbye, that honors the dignity of the child, that makes sure the child is never in an ounce of pain from the time they were born to the time they pass. Dr. Bashowski said in our Sunday Visit article, quote, "You can treat the mom as a mother, as someone who loves her sick child, and then you also can treat the sick child as a member of the human family. You don't end the disease by getting rid of people with the diseases. You walk with them." So if you ever feel stumped by this emotional argument that's made sometimes when you're on campuses and you're having a discussion about abortion, but what you do with a child with anencephaly is you be born with half a brain, just remember these two words: perinatal hospice. There's actually a website, perinatalhospice.org, and you can click on the top. It says list of programs, it says all the programs that are available across the country. You can also go to a great website for a wonderful organization out of Minnesota called Prenatal Partners for Life. Prenatal Partners for Life can help you make that hospice plan. Sometimes families are actually being told, and this story I'm not going to tell you is a real life story of the founder of Prenatal Partners for Life, Mary Kellett. Her son was born with trisomy 18, so it's more severe than Down syndrome. Trisomy 18 humans may survive into their teens, maybe early 20s, but it is more life-threatening than Down syndrome. And most children born with trisomy 18 have a cleft palate. Mary did not know her last son, Peter, had trisomy 18. He was born with cleft palate. Doctor said, well, just go home and let him pass. Would not offer to treat the cleft palate, which it's a very treatable thing. You know, if your child's born with a cleft palate, he can't latch or eat, right? And it's a very simple surgical procedure that the child could then eat and won't starve to death. But if the child isn't offered that procedure and moms aren't offered the procedure, the child will starve to death. That's what they were going to do in Minnesota in the 21st century, is let him starve to death because he had trisomy 18. So Mary helps other parents walk through a lot of these adverse and complicated medical diagnoses to say, look, here are the options. Here's things you can demand to give to your child. And don't let the hospital basically euthanize your child without telling you. So Prenatal Partners for Life, prenatalpartnersforlife.org and perinatalhospice.org. Two great resources for you to bookmark and have handy on your phone, on your laptop. All right. Finally, I am going to end with some great news today. It's been a while since I updated you on Planned Parenthood's close this year, and so it is not slowed down in the meantime. We are now at, drum roll, 44 Planned Parenthood closures this year. My good friend, Dr. Michael New, professor at Catholic University of America, has been tracking all these closures, and I'm going to read them out to you. Gilroy, California; Madeira, California; San Diego, California; San Mateo, California; Santa Cruz, California; South San Francisco, California; Fort Lauderdale, Florida; Bloomington, Illinois; Decatur, Illinois; Inglewood, Illinois; Ottawa, Illinois; Evansville, Indiana; Ames, Iowa; Cedar Rapids, Iowa; Sioux City, Iowa; Urbandale, Iowa; Baton Rouge, Louisiana; New Orleans, Louisiana. Those are all the Planned Parenthoods left in the state, by the way. None now. Jackson, Michigan; Petoskey, Michigan; Marquette, Michigan; Ann Arbor, Michigan; Apple Valley, Minnesota; Richfield, Minnesota; Alexandria, Minnesota; Bemidji, Minnesota; Joplin, Missouri; Las Vegas, Nevada 2; Bellamar, New Jersey; Inglewood, New Jersey; Manhattan, New York. That was the flagship Margaret Sanger Center. Springfield, Ohio; Hamilton, Ohio; Cleveland, Ohio; Moon Township, PA; Memphis, Tennessee; Houston, Texas 2; Tyler, Texas; St. George, Utah; Logan, Utah; St. Johnsbury, Vermont; Delavan, Wisconsin. By the way, most of those are happening in blue states. The next time someone tells you all the abortion facilities in red states are shutting down or limiting healthcare access in red states because of evil Republicans, yeah, most of those were in blue Democrat states, so suck it. Every single one of these closures, folks, is a victory. It represents tireless pro-life activism that's taken place in front of these Planned Parenthoods for years, with 40 Days for Life, Students for Life, Sidewalk Advocates for Life. These victories aren't just like victories on a tweet or a piece of paper or a list I read off. They literally represent children who will now be saved, because these abortion facilities, these abortion referring facilities, are no longer in business and closed. Planned Parenthood has closed dozens of clinics this year, and they started doing it even before the big, beautiful bill was signed into law July 1st. One of the clinics that just closed September 30th was the mega facility in Houston. I've spent so much time praying in front of this mega facility. They bought this mega facility, which, by the way, looks like an Aztec temple where they used to do human sacrifices. Just look up the image for yourself if you want. For 15 years, pro-lifers have been praying in front of that sidewalk, bringing mobile ultrasound clinics to the sidewalk. This was a mega facility in Houston. I think it was the largest abortion facility in the entire Western Hemisphere, outside of China. Pro-lifers for 15 years never gave up that they would see this facility shut down. It was this huge, huge facility. In fact, it was the center of David Daleiden and the Center for Medical Progress's big undercover investigation. If you'll remember, this is where he went and caught the employees dumping out a large bag of well-formed, so big late-term babies from the freezer. And they were going through these babies, talking about the aborted human tissue they could extract from them and get money from them. Do you remember that? Or that it was like one nurse was like trying or something like that, and she was like joking about these babies, how big they were. They brought these dead babies out of the freezer to show the quality of the specimens they had collected, in hopes that these fake buyers, David Daleiden and others, would pay them for the dead bodies. And that bag, in the one video, the bag that they pulled out of the freezer was just from the dead babies' late-term abortions they had committed that day. That's Planned Parenthood. This is the kind of horror that was invited into Houston and into these neighborhoods when Planned Parenthood opened up this mega facility. Now, I recognize these 44 facilities are a strong start, but we all know it's not the finish line. There are hundreds more to go, and Planned Parenthood could easily regain its financial footing in a new presidential administration. They could easily do it. So we have to stay on our guard. We have to continue to push for a full defunding of Planned Parenthood in our country, not just a 1-year temporary pause of 80% of their funds, their Medicaid funds. We have to push the Republicans in the next budget reconciliation bill. Once Democrats allow the government to open up again, we have to make sure in the second budget reconciliation bill, which should start negotiations in January, that Planned Parenthood is defunded for the full 10 years, because now we have proven Planned Parenthood can be defunded. So now they need to be defunded for the full 10 years. We are also calling on the Trump administration to play the Trump card and debar Planned Parenthood, to limit them from even, ban them from even applying for federal funds or receiving any federal funds for 3 years, or doing any business with any federal contractors. This would be a massive game changer if President Trump would play his Trump card and debar Planned Parenthood. So we need to pray. We need to pray that these facilities stay closed, that more facilities continue to close across the country, that Planned Parenthood just doesn't make financial sense for them to continue to kill babies. We need to pray that Congress, once the federal government opens up again, comes back, makes sure that the Republican leadership in both the House and the Senate make sure that Planned Parenthood is defunded for 10 years. And we need to pray that the Trump administration, especially Kelly Loeffler, the small business administrator appointed by President Trump, acts to debar Planned Parenthood of their crimes. The biggest one that we can prove that's super easy is that Planned Parenthood illegally took COVID Paycheck Protection Program money from the SBA. And for that reason alone, Kelly Loeffler can move to debar Planned Parenthood across the entire federal government. So we have more work to do to tell Planned Parenthood to go fund themselves. Even though I'm sometimes drinking out my Planned Parenthood Tears mug. It might be a little bit too celebratory too soon. Oh, by the way, have you gone to the Pro-Life Gen shop yet? You can buy these now. I made them put them up on our official Pro-Life Gen shop. If you go to prolifegen.org, you can hit shop at the very, it says shop our brands, but shop.prolifegen.org. That's our official like merch location for all things Students for Life and Pro-Life Gen. So make sure you pick it up. Thank you all for joining today's episode of Kristan Hawkins Show. Make sure you subscribe and follow for more discussions like this. If you want to hear from me daily, Monday through Friday, you can join my personal text line. I'll just send you a news item, something that I think you need to know about, a talking point you can use. Just text the word Kristan, Kristan, to 53445. Until next week, keep speaking up for the voiceless and stand for life. We've got a lot more work cut out for us. Bye, everyone.